The train stopped. All left, except one passenger, forever silent. "Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallow. Let me know below. Where are you watching today? Your voices bring this journey alive. I cherish every word." The SS Galatea had docked at Southampton under a crisp spring sun, the kind of light that makes every brass railing gleam and every uniform seem freshly pressed. On the quayside, the air smelled faintly of salt and engine oil, mingled with the chatter of porters and the rustle of disembarking passengers. A voyage from Cherbourg to England was hardly an odyssey, yet there was always a faint sense of ceremony when a ship slid into port, the suggestion that its passengers carried secrets from one shore to the other, folded away in trunks and locked inside discreet glances. The disembarkation was running with military precision. Names were ticked off a manifest. Luggage was stacked in tidy pyramids. By all appearances, nothing was amiss, until Mr. Harold Lacey, the ship's purser, frowned at his clipboard and stepped a little closer to the gangway. The name was there, clearly printed: Mrs. Eloise Fernley, cabin B27. She had boarded at Cherbourg 2 nights ago. She had taken her meals in the first-class saloon. She had been seen promenading on the upper deck that very afternoon. And yet, she had not come down the gangway, nor had she returned her key to the steward. At first, the assumption was simply that Mrs. Fernley had been slow to gather her things, perhaps taking tea in her cabin while the others hurried ashore. But when the steward knocked, then entered, cabin B27 was empty, her trunk still locked, her hat still resting on its stand, her cabin slippers placed neatly by the bed. What was missing was the passenger herself. It was at this point that the ship's captain, a grave and deliberate man named Captain Morris, felt the first twinge of unease. The Galatea was not a vessel where passengers simply vanished between dock and customs. A discreet but thorough search was ordered, starting with the lounges and ending, awkwardly, with the lifeboat deck. Mrs. Fernley did not appear. By the time the ship's manifest was checked again, the captain's unease had deepened into something closer to alarm. For Mrs. Fernley had not simply failed to disembark. There was no record of her leaving the ship at all, and none of the crew could recall seeing her since the late afternoon. The steward who attended her cabin swore she had been reading by the porthole at 4 o'clock, dressed for dinner. At 6:30, with the customs officers already wondering at the delay, the police were contacted. Their presence, however, introduced a fresh difficulty. The Galatea was not without prominent passengers, and discretion was paramount. No one wished for whispers in the evening papers about the missing lady before the matter could be quietly resolved. It was into this precise and delicate situation, the kind that smells faintly of scandal, that Monsieur Hercule Poirot found himself stepping. Poirot had not intended to involve himself in any maritime matter that day. He had been on the quay to greet a friend returning from the continent, and had paused, as was his habit, to observe the orderly chaos of the docks. The neat lines of the passengers descending the gangway pleased him. The careless handling of the luggage did not. It was while he was reflecting upon the inefficiency of stevedores that Captain Morris, who knew him by reputation, if not by acquaintance, approached him with a certain urgency in his voice. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive the imposition, but I believe we may have a small problem aboard." Poirot inclined his head with polite curiosity. "A small problem, Captain? You speak as one who wishes it to be small, but fears it is large, n'est-ce pas?" The captain hesitated. "One of our passengers, a Mrs. Eloise Fernley, has failed to disembark. We've searched the ship. She isn't aboard, nor, apparently, has she gone ashore." Poirot's dark eyes sharpened. "A paradox, then. She is not on the ship. She is not off the ship. Where is she, mon capitaine?" "That," said the captain, "is the difficulty." Poirot, with the faintest of smiles, dusted an invisible speck from his sleeve. "A disappearing lady. Ah, captain, you tempt me. Lead the way." And so, while porters continued to carry trunks past them, and impatient relatives waited beyond the gates, Poirot ascended the gangway of the Galatea. The ship smelled faintly of polish and salt air. Its passageways gleamed with a cleanliness that suggested pride rather than necessity. Yet beneath that surface order, Poirot felt the subtle ripple of something disturbed, a thread pulled loose from an otherwise impeccable weave. Cabin B-27 was precisely as the steward had described: the hat, the slippers, the locked trunk. Poirot's gaze lingered on the slippers for several moments, as though they were speaking to him in a language no one else understood. He asked the steward to recount, in exact detail, the last time he had seen Mrs. Fernley. Words were repeated, gestures described, times noted down with the precision of a watchmaker. Poirot listened without interruption, then turned toward the porthole. Outside, the dock stretched away in neat lines of concrete and shadow. Somewhere among the bustle was a woman who had been seen that very afternoon, and who, by all logic, could not have simply ceased to be. Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. "Captain, may I see your passenger list?" The captain produced it, and Poirot took it in his gloved hands, scanning it with swift, darting glances. After a long moment, he handed it back. "Captain," he said softly, "this is not merely the affair of a passenger who did not disembark. It is the affair of a passenger who was never quite what she seemed." Captain Morris's mouth tightened in a straight, naval line when Poirot observed that Mrs. Fernley had never been quite what she seemed, but he asked no questions until they reached the first-class saloon. There, in a hush that belonged to good wood and thick carpets, the purser already waited with his manifest, the dining-room maitre d' with an air of injured propriety, and the chief steward whose anxiety had begun to collect in beads at his temples. Poirot asked, very gently, for a silver tray and a small sheaf of blank cards. He placed the tray on a low table near the window where the light was cleanest. "Before we ring the alarm bell to the whole ship," he said, "we ask for only those who have had conversation with Madame in the last 24 hours. To make noise, none. To disturb the hive, none. We lift the corner of the comb and look." The cards were filled swiftly under his direction, a list of names far shorter than one might expect for a lady who took her meals sociably and walked the deck in the afternoon. "Sir Alister Kent," read the purser, tapping his pencil, "industrialist. Shared a table at luncheon yesterday and today. 4 covers. Miss Violet Markham, her paid companion, we understand. Dr. Lionel Rathbone, the ship's doctor, consulted for a headache at noon. Mr. Julian Dane, journalist. She spoke with him on the promenade after tea. Mrs. Inez Varley, the actress, travelling under her married name, a brief acquaintance in the ladies' lounge. And Reverend Thomas Greaves, he says she asked him in passing whether there would be morning prayers upon docking." Poirot added one more name in his neat foreign hand. "And Mr. Harold Lacey, the purser who knows the rhythms of his ship as I know the hairs of my moustaches." The captain raised a brow. "And all of them still aboard?" "All who have not yet fought their way to the taxis," said Lacey with a grimace. "We delayed disembarkation for the first class when you called the police. Second class has gone. Steerage is finished. The notable names remain." "Then we keep them a little longer," Poirot said, and his smile was contrite and iron both. They came in ones and twos, with that combination of curiosity and annoyance that greets delay in the well-to-do. Sir Alister Kent was a square man who wore his suit like a breastplate. His knuckles were nicked with old white scars. Machinery, Poirot thought at once, and the chain of his watch lay like a punctuation mark across his waistcoat. Violet Markham, thin to transparency, and every inch correct, hovered a half-pace behind the chair, as if waiting for permission to sit. Dr. Rathbone's manner was brisk and amused. Mrs. Varley's was the practised languor of a woman who has learned that the world will offer a cushion wherever she intends to rest. Reverend Greaves had the good grey hair of a parish saint and the uneasy eyes of a man unused to ships. Julian Dane, who kept his pen in his breast pocket and his hat in his hand, scanned the room as if it were copy. Poirot did not begin with questions. Instead, he arranged them. He placed Sir Alistair where the light fell full upon his face. He set Miss Markham at a chair that did not quite align with the carpet's pattern. To Mrs. Varley, he offered a seat so low it would oblige her to adjust her posture if she sat at all. To the journalist, he gave the chair nearest the door, which was to remain discreetly ajar. Then he stood between them and the tray, and said, in his softest voice, "Madame Eloise Fernley has not yet descended the gangway. We do not find her aboard. We do not find her ashore. It is a small problem that wishes to grow large. You will be good enough to assist the captain in not allowing it to become untidy." Mrs. Varley's hand reached for the pendant at her throat and fell back with a tiny clink against the chair arm. Sir Alister's jaw made the movement of a man grinding a single grain of sand between his teeth. Julian Dane's eyes brightened intolerably. Poirot noticed each, and noticed also that Miss Markham had not moved at all. Even the line of her hat ribbon remained without tremor. He turned to her first. "Mademoiselle Markham, you are the companion to Madame Fernley?" "Yes," she said, in a voice that had had the edges smoothed off at a good school. "For 6 months. I was engaged through a Kensington agency." "You dined together?" "At luncheon, yes. She took very little, a plate of consommé and half a pear. And at 4 o'clock she read at her porthole dressed for dinner. So says the steward. Did you see her after?" Miss Markham's lashes lowered. "Number. She asked me to take the air and leave her to rest. She was often fatigued before dinner." "Fatigued," Poirot repeated, as if tasting a spice. "And why fatigued?" "Travel does not suit her digestion," Miss Markham said after a fractional pause. The ship's doctor coughed politely. "She asked me for a mixture for the head, not the stomach," he said. "A nervous headache, common enough at sea." "Doctor," said Poirot, "I will trouble you presently." And he changed the field with the flick of a wrist, turning to Sir Alister Kent. "You lunched together also? You spoke of business?" "Hardly," Sir Alister said. His voice had the flat confidence of a man whose words are usually final. "The lady was charming, but not conversant with engineering. Her interest was in theatres. We spoke instead of the weather and the Channel crossing. She did not eat, she toyed." "And after luncheon?" "I walked the deck with Captain Morris," Sir Alister said, with the satisfaction of a man producing an alibi as sturdy as his factories. "We discussed tonnage rates. The captain will recall it." "The captain recalls," Morris said, not without dryness, "and the rates, unfortunately." It was Mrs. Varley who let a little spark leap. "If the dear lady has simply gone ashore with a friend—" "She has not," said Lacey, the purser. He was a conscientious man, and did not like supposition. "Her passport remains with us for the formalities. Her trunk is locked and was never sent down. Her cabin key was not returned." Mrs. Varley rearranged her glove finger by finger. "Then she has walked off in a state. It happens. People have little storms." Poirot's head tilted. "You think she is a person of little storms?" Mrs. Varley offered him a smile that admitted there were things one only observed from the powder room, and that a gentleman would not demand to share them. Poirot accepted the smile and set it next to the other objects on his mental tray. Reverend Greaves, who had been edging his way toward invisibility, cleared his throat. "I spoke to her for a few minutes, no more. A passing question about prayers, as the purser said. She seemed preoccupied, not distressed," he added hastily, as if to absolve himself of melodrama. "Merely not listening for answers." "And you, Monsieur Dane?" Poirot's tone, mild as milk, went to the journalist last. Dane's mouth curved. "She asked me whether I thought England was less forgiving than the continent. I replied that England forgives easily, but forgets slowly. We were interrupted by a gentleman who wished to know the time, and when I turned back, she had stepped away. That was all. The gentleman who wished to know the time, Poirot repeated. A large fellow in a reefer jacket, Dane said. One of the transient types who like to look nautical on land. He was not a passenger. Poirot allowed the sound to lengthen. You see, we collect the pebbles. We do not yet know the shape of the beach. The steward who attended B-27 came in at the captain's nod, cap in hands. Alfred Barnes, broad, respectful, still a touch out of breath from running messages. Poirot addressed him as if there were no one else in the room. Barnes, when you last saw Madame, she was reading. What book? 'Twas a yellow one, sir. French, I think. I couldn't read the title. Yellow, Poirot murmured. And the bed? Made? The cabin? Tidy? As always, sir. She kept neat. The slippers by the bed, hat on the stand, shawl folded, the window blind half down against the sun. I put the tea down and left. She said she would not dress for dinner. Her head. Poirot went to the porthole again, as he had in the cabin, though here there was nothing to see but a reflection of people pretending not to watch each other. When he turned back, his eyes were very bright. Messieurs, mesdames, I will tell you something that is not a secret, but which behaves like one. The passenger list is a little work of art. It is a gallery of names, and each name frames a person. Madame Eloise Fernley. The name is a frame. But what it frames, that is the question. He touched the tray with a fingertip. Her ticket was purchased with cash through an agent. The address given for her in London is a hotel where one does not leave forwarding letters. One receives them. And the passport she gave to the purser, while perfectly in order, is a passport that has seen very little of the world for a lady who speaks of theatres in Nice and seasons in Rome. Captain Morris made a small, involuntary movement. You think the passport isn't hers? I think, said Poirot, that it is possible the frame does not match the picture quite so exquisitely as one might wish. His voice warmed an inch. Do not alarm yourselves. What matters for us is simple. Whom did Madame resemble? In manner, in conversation, in her silences. Whom did she avoid? Miss Markham's gaze flickered for the first time. She avoided, I think, anyone who asked where she would be staying in London. She answered, but differently each time. To me it was the Langham. To Mrs. Varley, she said Claridge's Mrs. Varley nodded, slow as syrup. That is true. And to another lady in the lounge, she said Brown's. A trio of hotels, said Dane softly. A trifecta of not being found. Doctor, Poirot said, turning at last to Rathbone, suppose a lady wishes to be very tired at 4 o'clock. What does she take at noon? Rathbone's smile thinned. Something to the point, Mr. Poirot? I gave her 10 grains of phenacetin and a bromide draught. It would dull a headache and make her drowsy. Nothing dramatic. And if she were already dosing herself? Poirot persisted. If she collected the little phials as some collect the postcards? Then she might be more drowsy, Rathbone conceded. Still nothing that would send her sleepless, strolling into the Channel, if that is the shadow you're winking at. Poirot's hands opened. I wink at no shadows, Doctor. I tidy rooms. In Madame's cabin there is the neatness of a woman who practices neatness. But there is also the neatness that is the echo of a man. The slippers, placed with the heels perfectly aligned. The shawl, folded in quarters, not thirds. The blind, set not by one who fears glare, but by one who dislikes asymmetry. She had a companion who is trained for order. He inclined his head to Miss Markham. Yet these are not your folds. Miss Markham coloured, very slightly. Number I turned down in thirds. I learned it at school. Just so. And the tray? The cup saucered at the right, the spoon at the precise angle. This is not the work of a woman who had a headache. Someone came after Barnes left, and had sufficient leisure to tidy what did not need tidying? Sir Alister's jaw moved again. You mean to say someone was in her cabin at 4:30? I say that someone who likes things to be exact was in her cabin, Poirot answered, and that this person wishes us to believe Madame left hastily, yet found time to be precise. The two do not embrace well. There was a small silence into which the ship's heartbeat, the low vibration of the engines, seemed to climb back, sheepish at having been forgotten. On the quay, a whistle blew. Footsteps went past the saloon windows, purposeful and indifferent. Julian Dane broke the quiet. If she was not the woman her papers said, then perhaps she feared being recognized. Perhaps she saw someone aboard who could undo her. Or someone ashore, Mrs. Varley murmured. An appointment, a rendezvous one does not write in a diary. Appointments leave traces, Poirot said. So do fears. Captain, I will speak with your gangway watch. We will learn whether a woman in a dove-grey coat with a small hat and a veil, comme si, came down without a passport, with or without a companion, with or without luggage. We will learn whether anyone carried a lady's hat box, not on the luggage list. And Barnes, he added kindly, you will tell me whether the yellow book in French speaks of love or of law. Barnes looked bleakly hopeful. I'll fetch it at once, sir, if it is there. Poirot's eyes rested on him. If it is there, he said, and the words landed like a pin precisely where he intended. For I think the person who likes the exactness would not forget to remove the thing that is truly untidy. The captain gave a short order. Barnes hurried out. Lacey left to murmur to a constable at the head of the gangway. The suspects, though no one had named them so, sat with the stillness of portraits awaiting varnish. Poirot used the pause to drift, apparently aimless, toward the door where the journalist leaned. He adjusted the angle of the chair that did not align with the carpet. Miss Markham's eyes followed the correction as a thirsty person follows a glass of water. You see it also, Poirot said to her, very low. Yes, she breathed, and then, after a fatal half-second, added, she would have seen it too. Merci, said Poirot, and the single word was a pocket in which he tucked a note. Lacey returned first, a shade paler than he had gone. No one matching her description passed the watch, sir, he said to the captain, and then to Poirot, with the fastidious honesty of his kind. One lady descended in a grey coat with a veil, yes, but with a porter following, 2 trunks in tow, and her passport stamped, not our woman. No hat box unaccounted for. No one turned back. And Barnes? Captain Morris asked. Barnes came in behind Lacey, carrying the French book as one carries an egg. It was in the cabin, sir, top drawer of the desk. Les masques obligatoires. He stumbled over the title. Plays, I think. Obligatory masks, murmured the journalist, unable to resist an epigram. We all have our stage business. Poirot took the book, turned to the front flyleaf, and looked not at the name, there was none, but at a faint impress in the paper, as if a page torn out had pressed its ghost upon the next. He angled the book into the light, until the indentations offered up their whisper, a list of 3 names written and ripped away. He smiled, not with triumph, but with satisfaction at something aptly placed. Captain, he said, closing the book on its silence, we know now 2 things. 1, Madame read about the masks one must wear, which is a comfort to me because it is what she was doing. 2, someone made a list and took it, but pressed too hard. If we are fortunate, and if the paper was not used for the lighting of a cigarette, we will find it where the person put it, very carefully. And where do exact people put exact things? Mrs. Varley asked, unable to help herself. In the pocket most seldom used, Poirot said. Or, if they are sentimental, in a book where the title permits the conscience to shrug. He tapped the cover of the plays with a fingertip. We proceed, mes amis. We proceed very quietly, for it is not only a passenger who did not disembark we seek. It is the person who prefers the world arranged, who has arranged, perhaps, that Madame should not disembark at all. No one moved. It was as if the ship itself were listening. Poirot set the book down on the silver tray, and the soft ring of it was like a bell struck at the beginning of a service. He turned toward the door, and with that small, precise bow of his, indicated that the little grey cells had begun their work in earnest. Poirot left the saloon with the slow, thoughtful tread of a man who was neither in haste nor idling, but simply waiting for the air itself to tell him something. Captain Morris walked at his side, the purser trailing just behind. They took the companionway down to B-deck once more, and when they stepped into the corridor where cabin B-27 lay, the scent of polish and faint stale perfume still lingered. The door was ajar, just as it had been when Barnes had gone to fetch the yellow book. Poirot paused on the threshold, surveying it again, as if he expected the cabin to have rearranged itself in his absence. "You see, Captain," Poirot murmured, "order is a language. The difficulty is that it can be spoken by more than one person." He crossed to the writing desk and pulled open the top drawer. Inside lay a few sheets of the ship's stationery, neatly stacked, and a pen whose nib glistened faintly with ink. Poirot lifted the stack and examined the top page for the indentations of writing, but they were smooth and untouched. "Whoever made the list," he said, "did so on paper brought by themselves, not supplied by the ship. It is, how shall we say, a little mark of caution." Barnes, standing respectfully by the door, ventured, "Could be she brought her own notepaper, sir." "It could be, yes," Poirot agreed. "And yet, Barnes, you and I, we are men who look not only at what could be, but at what is likely. A lady who boards for only 2 nights, who travels with 1 trunk, who has her correspondence, how many sheets will she bring? Enough. For a little note, perhaps. Not enough to write a list of 3 names without wasting paper, unless it is paper she values more than the ship's own. Ah, and now, see." He moved to the trunk, stooped, and traced a finger across the lock. The metal gleamed, but a fine smear of darker dust marked the edges, as if the lock had been handled and then wiped imperfectly. "You keep your luggage in your cabin, oui, Captain? No steward has reason to move it?" "None, unless requested." "Then someone has tried this lock. Perhaps they succeeded, perhaps not. But the attempt, it is here." The purser shifted uneasily. "It would take a passkey, and those," Poirot straightened, "are few in number." "Good. We shall reduce the circle." He turned to Barnes. "When you came for the tea tray at 4:30, the trunk was closed? The lock was facing you?" Barnes nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, just as it is now." Poirot inclined his head and let the moment hang before stepping back into the corridor. "Captain, we must know where each of the persons in our small group was between 4 and 6:30. You will obtain their statements, not in writing, they will craft too carefully, but in the manner of a casual question. People speak more freely when they do not know they are being recorded." Morris agreed and moved off with the purser. Poirot, left alone for a moment, leaned on the rail of the companionway and looked down toward the cargo hatch below. The bustle there had eased. The last of the luggage was being wheeled across the quay. His eyes narrowed at a flash of movement, a porter slipping something into his own coat pocket before disappearing into the shadow of a gangway strut. Poirot descended 2 decks without hurry, emerged onto the quay, and caught the man just as he stepped into a side passage. "Pardon, my good fellow," Poirot said, the words warm but edged. "A moment of your time." The man froze, his hand still half in his coat. With a sigh, he drew out the object, a folded sheet of paper, creased and smudged. "Found it in a waste bin outside a first-class cabin," he muttered. "Didn't think it'd be worth—" Poirot took it with a look that discouraged further speech. The paper was ship stationery, but the writing, pressured, almost engraved into the fibres, had left ghost marks from an earlier sheet pressed upon it. Poirot angled it toward the light, and slowly, faintly, the shapes of letters revealed themselves. 3 names, written in a firm, precise hand: Julian Dane, Violet Markham, Lionel Rathbone. He folded the paper again, placed it in his breast pocket, and handed the porter a coin so neatly measured it was both a dismissal and a warning. The man vanished without a backward glance. Returning to the saloon, Poirot found Captain Morris already gathering the statements. The captain recited them without flourish. Sir Alistair had been in his cabin reading papers until dressing for dinner. Mrs. Varley had been writing letters in the lounge. Dane claimed to have been interviewing a fellow passenger about politics. Miss Markham had been in the library. Rathbone had been in the surgery inventorying supplies. Greaves had been walking the promenade in prayer. "Do you believe them?" Morris asked. "I believe that each has given the answer that comes most readily," Poirot said. "It is not yet the same thing as truth, and I believe something else, that our Madame Fernley had reason to list 3 of these names, and that reason is the thread we must pull." He asked for each to be found again, under the pretext of a final formality, before they disembarked. They reassembled with varying shades of irritation and wariness. Poirot looked at them as one might study a set of chess pieces, each poised on its square. "This afternoon," he began, "Madame Fernley was seen by her steward at 4 o'clock. By 6, she was gone. Between these 2 hours, someone visited her cabin. That person is precise, fastidious, yet left behind the arrangement of another's habit, betraying themselves. That same person had either access to her trunk or wished to, and this person is linked, in Madame's mind, with 2 others, for she made a list of 3 names." There was the smallest ripple, Mrs. Varley's head turning slightly towards Sir Alistair, Dane's fingers tightening on the brim of his hat, Miss Markham blinking once too often. Poirot let the silence stretch. "I will not yet say which names," he continued softly, "but know that she took care to conceal them, and someone took equal care to remove the list. It was done so quickly that the ghost of her writing remained for me to find." "You mean to say," Dr. Rathbone said with a short laugh, "that you've been peering at indentations in paper?" "Just so," Poirot replied gravely, "and from them I have learned this. Madame Fernley's disappearance is not an accident of tide or temperament. It is a matter of human design, and the design, mon capitaine, is not yet finished." Miss Markham's voice, precise but thin, cut into the hush. "If she made such a list, Monsieur Poirot, it could have been for her own protection." "Or as a preparation," Mrs. Varley murmured, "for whatever she intended to do when she left the ship." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but a preparation for what? A meeting? A warning? Or—" He glanced toward the porthole, where the key lay in strips of shadow and light. "For vanishing entirely?" The captain shifted uneasily. "What's your next step?" "I will examine each cabin belonging to those on the list, quietly, with your cooperation. People carry with them not only luggage, but the scent of their intentions. If Madame Fernley meant to leave, she had help or hindrance from one of them, and if she meant to remain hidden—" He let the thought trail, like a wake fading into dark water. No one objected, though Rathbone gave a snort, and Dane's eyes gleamed with the promise of copy. Poirot bowed faintly, and the gathering dissolved into the slow, reluctant dispersal of people who know they are not yet free to go. When the saloon was empty, save for Captain Morris, Poirot drew the folded paper from his pocket and laid it on the silver tray. 3 names, he said. "We shall begin with the cabins of these 3. But remember, Captain, it is not always the one who writes the list who is in danger. Sometimes it is the one who appears upon it." And with that, Poirot turned toward the companionway again, the little grey cells humming, the thread of the vanished passenger winding tighter in his grasp. Poirot began with the nearest of the 3 cabins on his list, that of Julian Dane. The journalist had departed the saloon with an air of reluctant amusement, but when the captain's knock brought him to the door again, his eyes had sharpened. He stepped back to admit them, the brim of his hat still in his hand, as if he intended to keep the visit brief. It was a cabin for a man who travelled often and well. The berth was made. The small desk held an open notebook, with 2 fountain pens lying crosswise upon it, and a leather valise sat half-packed on the floor. A press card peeked from the top of a folded raincoat. Poirot crossed to the desk, without asking leave, noting that the notebook's latest page contained nothing more than a series of short lines, fragmentary notes, each followed by a dash and a single word, as if the rest had been withheld. "This is your work, monsieur?" "Fragments," Dane said, leaning on the doorframe. "Reminders for when I'm back at my desk. Nothing worth stealing." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "stealing comes in many forms. You spoke with Madame Fernley on the promenade. She asked you about forgiveness. Why?" Dane's brows rose. "I assumed she was referring to divorce. Her manner, cool, brittle, reminded me of women I've met who've been badly treated by their husbands, and she asked whether England would treat her more harshly than France." "Did she say for what offence?" "No," Dane said, watching Poirot closely, "and I didn't press her. My trade teaches me that some questions, asked too soon, close the door for good." Poirot allowed the faintest smile. "Wise. And at 4 o'clock?" "Library," Dane said without hesitation, looking up a quotation for an article. "Alone." Poirot glanced once more at the page of half-phrases, then left without comment. Miss Markham's cabin was 2 doors along. She stood stiffly aside as Poirot entered, her hands clasped as though she were waiting for an examination. Her berth was immaculate, the luggage strapped and ready. A small stack of books sat on the table. Devotional works, a French grammar, and a thin green-bound volume with a pressed violet inside the cover. Poirot lifted it gently, glancing at the page where the flower lay. The text beneath was a description of the seasons in Paris. "You were in the library this afternoon," he said without looking up. "What book?" "George Eliot's Daniel Deronda," she answered at once. "I left it on the table by the window." Poirot's head turned, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in the cabin. "And Madame Fernley's yellow book? Had you seen it before today?" Miss Markham hesitated just long enough to betray calculation. "Yes, she carried it with her. I never touched it." He replaced the green book, smoothed the cover, and stepped toward the door. "One question more. Why were there no personal photographs in Madame Fernley's cabin?" Markham's composure faltered. "She disliked reminders. She said they tied one down." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "Freedom, then, was what she sought." The third name took them to the ship's surgery, where Dr. Rathbone was checking a cupboard of medicines. His welcome was polite, if laced with a kind of professional impatience. "Still chasing your ghost, Monsieur Poirot? I assure you, my last sight of her was when she took the headache draught." "You did not escort her back to her cabin?" "No need. She was perfectly steady on her feet." Rathbone shut the cupboard with precision. "I remained here until dressing for dinner. You may ask the orderly." Poirot studied the man's face for a moment, before glancing at the shelf above the desk. A small leather-bound appointment book rested there, the edges of its pages faintly smudged. "Your consultations, do you note them?" "Briefly. Passenger name, complaint, treatment." Poirot lifted the book and saw a single entry for the afternoon. "Mrs. Fernley, 14:15, phenacetin, bromide draught." Beneath it, a faint erasure. Another name, rubbed almost into invisibility. "You keep your handwriting very neat, Doctor," Poirot observed. "But erasures, they are untidy." Rathbone's mouth tightened. "A passenger asked for indigestion powders, and then said they'd changed their mind. I struck it out." Poirot replaced the book without comment, though his glance at the captain was enough to convey that the detail would not be forgotten. Back in the companionway, Morris exhaled. "And? You have seen all three?" "I have seen," Poirot replied, "that the cabins speak even when their owners do not. Monsieur Dane's is the cabin of a man accustomed to concealment by omission. Mademoiselle Markham's is the cabin of one who curates her life so tightly that anything unplanned leaves a mark, and Dr. Rathbone's contains an erasure, a thing done when one wishes the world to believe something never occurred. 3 names, 3 small dissonances." He turned back toward B-27. "But still, Captain, the central question is not who wished Madame Fernley harm. It is, who wished her absent." They returned to her cabin, Poirot moving with an intentness that made Morris lower his voice. "You think she's still aboard?" "I think," Poirot said, pausing in the doorway, "that the possibility is strong enough to demand a search beyond the obvious." He bent and examined the space beneath the berth, empty save for a folded rug. Then, with a fingertip, he tested the wall paneling beside the wardrobe. It shifted slightly, revealing a narrow recess, no wider than a suitcase. It was empty, but the faint scent of a different perfume lingered there, spicier than the one in the room. Poirot straightened. "A hiding place, Captain, used recently. Whether by her or for her, we cannot yet say. But if she left of her own will, she did not leave from here directly." A sharp knock on the doorframe announced Barnes. "Beg pardon, sir, but the gangway watch says a small motor launch came alongside at 5:30. Crew thought it was delivering supplies, crates of bottled water for the kitchens. But one crate was lighter than the rest, and 2 men carried it off. No papers signed." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A crate? Large enough for, what shall we say, a lady who wishes not to be seen?" Morris swore under his breath. "If she was taken off by boat, or left willingly," Poirot said, "in the company of those she trusted enough to list. Which changes the complexion entirely." He stepped into the corridor, his voice low but certain. "We will verify the launch, where it came from, where it went, and we will watch, Captain, for the reactions when our 3 friends hear of it, because a secret shared by 3 is no secret at all, and someone will betray themselves." The captain gave a short nod and set off toward the bridge, while Poirot lingered for a moment at the top of the companionway, gazing out through a porthole at the faint ripple of the harbour waters. His moustache twitched, almost imperceptibly. Somewhere, very close, was the truth. It had not left with the tide. It was here, circling patiently, waiting for him to net it. He turned, his steps quickening toward the saloon once more. The game had shifted. The lines were drawn tighter. Now it was only a matter of seeing who would step too close to the edge. The suspects were gathered again in the saloon, though this time the air between them felt taut, as if some invisible cord had been pulled. Poirot entered without hurry, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, the small gleam in his eyes suggesting he was about to lay a piece on the board that would alter the whole game. Captain Morris followed, his jaw set, while the purser stood by the door with the stiff vigilance of a man guarding against movement. Poirot began without preamble. "Mesdames, Messieurs, we have learned something new. At 5:30, a small motor launch came alongside this ship. It delivered crates, yes, but one crate was taken away. A crate that, according to those who carried it, felt strangely light." No one spoke, but the silence was alive. Poirot did not look directly at anyone. Instead, he let his gaze travel, seemingly idly, from one to the next. Sir Alister's eyes narrowed, his fingers gripping the arm of his chair, as if measuring the truth of the words. Mrs. Varley's mouth parted slightly, before she closed it again. Dane tilted his head, an expression of careful interest playing at his lips. Miss Markham's lashes lowered in a slow blink. Rathbone rubbed at the bridge of his nose, an old habit of medical men called upon to deliver bad news. "Now," Poirot continued softly, This crate could have contained anything, bottles of wine, for example. Or perhaps, if one wished to be most imaginative, it could have contained a lady of slender build who wished not to walk down the gangway. Such a thing would require assistance, and such assistance would not be given lightly. There must be trust, and more than trust, there must be need. He let the words hang, as though waiting to see which mind they would land upon most heavily. Dane's fingers began to drum on the brim of his hat, then stilled when he noticed Poirot's eyes upon them. Poirot moved to the sideboard, and without looking, adjusted a stack of coasters so they were perfectly aligned. When a person disappears, there are always those who benefit by it, he said, and there are those who suffer. Often, they are not the same people. Madame Fernley may have left of her own free will. She may have been persuaded. She may have been removed. Each possibility tells me something different about those in this room. Sir Alistair gave a low, impatient sound. You've told us nothing concrete, Poirot. If she chose to leave, there's nothing for us to answer for. Poirot turned to him, head slightly inclined. And yet you are quick to imagine that she chose to leave. Why is that, monsieur? Most men, when confronted with the absence of a fellow passenger, imagine misfortune first, not freedom. Alistair's jaw tightened. Because I think she was the sort who made her own arrangements. Arrangements? Poirot's brows rose. I don't know what for, Alistair said, his tone now guarded. But I've seen her type, always looking past you, as though you're not quite the person they were meant to meet. Miss Markham shifted slightly, the movement so small it might have been overlooked by anyone else. Poirot caught it at once. Mademoiselle, he said, you travelled with her for 6 months. Did she often look past you? Yes, Markham admitted, her voice crisp, though there was a faint catch before the word. She was restless. She had contacts in London and Paris, friends she never named. There were times when I wondered if she had enemies. Enemies, murmured Mrs. Varley. How very dramatic. Poirot glanced at her. Drama, madame, is merely the truth told quickly, but we will take our truths slowly. For instance, Dr. Rathbone. You spoke with her last. Did she mention an appointment? Rathbone shook his head. Only that she wanted the draft, nothing else. And yet, doctor, you erased another name from your appointment book today. The doctor's hand stilled. That was nothing. Someone changed their mind. Perhaps, Poirot allowed. But erasures, you see, are like locked doors. They invite one to wonder what lies behind them. Dane's voice slid into the pause. All this over a woman who may have taken a boat to meet a friend. You're chasing smoke. Poirot looked at him with mild reproach. Ah, but monsieur, smoke tells you there is fire, and I do not think you are the man to mistake smoke for fog. For the first time, Dane's easy composure slipped. He opened his mouth, then closed it, settling for a slow shrug. Poirot returned to the centre of the room. This launch, it did not approach from the open water. It came from the harbour itself, meaning the arrangement was made here in Southampton, not at sea, which tells me Our Lady's plans, or her removal, were not conceived in the impulsive moment. They were prepared. Mrs. Varley spoke then, her tone light, but the edge beneath it sharp. Perhaps she met someone aboard who could arrange such a thing. Indeed, Poirot said, his gaze resting briefly on her before travelling onward. And perhaps this someone feared she would say too much before the ship docked. A fear strong enough to warrant haste. The captain stirred beside him. Are you suggesting she was taken off against her will? Poirot's moustache lifted faintly. I am suggesting, mon capitaine, that if she left willingly, she left with an accomplice, and if unwillingly, she left with her captor. In either case, that person is linked to the names on her list. He did not reveal the names. Instead, he watched the weight of the thought settle over them, observed the subtle tightening of hands, the way eyes slid away from one another. He drew a folded paper from his pocket, not the list itself, but a blank sheet, and set it on the silver tray. This represents, mes amis, the thing that was taken from her cabin, a list of 3 people. The one who took it did so because they feared what the list revealed. And that fear, he added softly, is what will betray them. The captain dismissed them one by one, keeping them under the purser's eye until the gangway could be closed again. Poirot lingered, listening to the shuffle of feet and the small, nervous laughter that people used to cover unease. When the last of them had gone, Morris leaned closer. "You've got them on edge. But who do you think took her off in that launch?" Poirot's eyes went to the porthole again, where the water lapped against the hull with a patient rhythm. "The one who fears she will return," he said, "because if she does, she will speak the truth, and it will not be forgiving." And as he spoke, he knew the next step would be to follow the trail of that launch through the harbour's tangled moorings, for somewhere along that shoreline was the first clear view of the hand that had moved her from the ship, and perhaps the reason her name was never meant to be on any passenger list at all. The harbour-master's office was a narrow, timber-panelled room that smelled faintly of tobacco and salt. Through its open windows came the slap of water against stone and the distant creak of mooring ropes. Captain Morris stood at the counter, speaking in low tones to a wiry man in a blue serge jacket who had the steady, unhurried manner of one accustomed to ships that waited for no man. Poirot stood just behind, his hands folded neatly on the knob of his cane, eyes drifting over the wall map, where every berth, buoy, and channel was marked in precise red ink. The harbour-master's assistant returned from a back office with a clipboard and a small ledger. "Only one launch came alongside the Galatea at that time," he said, flipping to the appropriate page. "Registered to a Mr. James Wilcox, moored at Pier 6. Hired for the afternoon, paid cash, crew of 2. "And the destination?" Poirot asked. "Out of the harbour, heading east along the estuary. We have no further record once they cleared the point. Private craft, you see." The man shrugged, not without sympathy. "They might have put in anywhere from Netley to Calshot." Poirot nodded, the tip of his cane tapping lightly on the floor. "This Mr. Wilcox, he hires his launch often?" "Occasionally. Takes day parties down the coast. But yesterday, no sir. Just the one job. And unusual in that he didn't pilot her himself. Sent 2 men in his place. Foreign, by the sound of it." Captain Morris frowned. "Foreign how?" The man hesitated. "Hard to say. Not French, not German. Maybe Eastern European." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "And you have their descriptions, naturally?" The harbour-master's assistant recited them, one tall, fair-haired, with a scar across the chin, the other shorter, dark-haired, wearing a cap pulled low. Poirot absorbed each detail with the quiet relish of a man assembling the border pieces of a puzzle. When they stepped back into the sunlight, Morris muttered, "Could be anyone. We can't search every inlet." Poirot's gaze moved to the long line of water beyond the quay, where gulls wheeled lazily in the air. "We do not need to search them all, mon capitaine. We need only to find the one to which our passenger intended to go. There will be a trace. There is always a trace." Back aboard the Galatea, Poirot requested the presence of Barnes. The steward arrived looking both flattered and apprehensive, his hands twisting his cap. "You have been most observant," Poirot told him. "You noticed the yellow book, the arrangement of the cabin. Now tell me, did Madame Fernley receive any messages during the voyage?" Barnes thought for a moment. "Not in the ordinary way, sir. But yesterday morning, one of the deckhands brought a note, said it had been handed up from a launch that had come alongside with supplies. She read it and slipped it into the yellow book." "And the launch? What time?" "Round 11, sir." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Before the boat at 5:30, then. So, one message comes in the morning, another, how shall we say, reply is arranged in the evening." The captain looked grim. If someone passed her that note, it was premeditated. Precisely, Poirot said. And here is the curious part. The note, of course, is gone with her. But we know it was placed in the yellow book, and that book was still in the cabin when we searched it. This means the note was removed later, by another hand. Barnes shifted uneasily. Perhaps she removed it herself before she left. Perhaps, Poirot allowed. And yet it would be a foolishness to leave the list of names behind and take the note. No, I think the note was of use to the one who also removed the list. The next step was to bring the three named persons together once more, but under a different pretext. This time, Poirot had them called to the observation lounge, where the view of the harbour spread out in a wide, sunlit panorama. The arrangement of chairs was deliberate. Dane by the starboard windows, Rathbone in the centre, Miss Markham slightly apart near the far end of the table. Poirot addressed them in a tone almost conversational. I have spoken with the harbour master. We know the launch left for the east. A convenient route if one wishes to avoid the eyes of the customs officials here, and more convenient still if one is met further along the coast by another party. He glanced out at the glinting water. It is a fine day for a rendezvous. Dane's gaze sharpened, his pencil poised over an empty notebook. You make it sound romantic. Romantic? Non, monsieur. In romance, one seeks the open declaration. This is secrecy, and secrecy is rarely for love alone. Poirot allowed the words to settle, then added, The launch crew were foreigners. I wonder, does that mean something to any of you? Rathbone shook his head with too much briskness. Plenty of foreign seamen in port, nothing unusual. Miss Markham's hands were folded tightly in her lap. I wouldn't know anything about boat crews, she said, but her voice carried the flatness of a prepared statement. Poirot nodded as if satisfied, though he watched them with the keenest attention. One more matter. Madame Fernley received a note yesterday morning from a launch that came alongside. She placed it in the yellow book. That note is no longer there. No reaction from Rathbone, none from Dane, at least none visible. But Miss Markham's eyes flickered, just once, toward the middle distance, the look of someone replaying a moment and calculating whether it could be recalled by another. Poirot's gaze followed that flicker, stored it away. Whoever removed the note, Poirot said, also removed the list. And why? Because they feared that what was written, names, instructions, warnings, might be understood if found together. Separate, they are puzzles. Together, they are the picture. The captain broke in, unable to contain his impatience. Poirot, if you know who took it, say so. Poirot's moustache twitched. Not yet, mon capitaine, but soon. We must first see how the pieces fall when the tide changes. He dismissed the three, each leaving under the purser's discreet watch. When the lounge was empty, Morris turned to him. You got something from that? Poirot inclined his head. Mademoiselle Markham knows more than she will say. Whether through loyalty, fear, or guilt, we shall discover. And Dr. Rathbone, he is too quick to dismiss the foreign crew. A doctor, he observes. He notices accents. His denial tells me he has already considered them. And Dane? A watcher, Poirot said simply. He records the scene as if it were copy for his paper. But there is one fact I cannot yet place. His interview on the promenade was interrupted by a man in a reefer jacket. This man could be one of our launch crew. The captain frowned. If he's still in Southampton, we could find him. We shall, Poirot said. But first, we return to the harbour this evening. We will walk the East Pier, where the smaller craft moor for the night. If our launch came back, it may be there now, cleaned of its cargo, but not of its scent. As the afternoon light lengthened, Poirot allowed himself a moment at the rail of the Galatea, watching the slow churn of the water against the quay. Somewhere along that shifting line of tide and shadow lay the path Madame Fernley had taken, and when he found the first solid footprint upon it, the rest, he was certain, would follow in perfect order. The east pier took the evening light like a polished blade, long and low, the water between its piles making a soft, patient sound. Small craft bobbed and nudged one another as if whispering. Captain Morris walked a little ahead to make their errand look official. Poirot kept half a pace behind, his eyes moving not upon the horizon, but upon the little details that betray where men have been and what they have done. Scratches fresh upon old paint, rope ends newly cut, a boot scuff that points like a finger. Pier 6 held Mr. Wilcox's launch in a slender pen backed by a shed that smelled of tar and damp canvas. The launch was ordinary by intention, its brass dulled by salt and use, but the care of a man exact about his property had kept her trim. A boy with a mop straightened when he saw the captain's cap and Poirot's neat hat. "Mr. Wilcox ain't here," he said at once. Went to his tea. "Then we borrow your eyes, mon petit," Poirot said kindly. "They will serve as well for the moment. Yesterday, at 5:30, 2 men took this boat to the Galatea. They returned when?" "Just on 7, the boy said, with the pride of one who keeps time with ships. "Before the lamps were lit." "And they brought something back?" Captain Morris prompted. "Crate," the boy said. "Stenciled water in big letters, only it didn't slosh the way it should when we set it down. Smelled of—" He wrinkled his nose, searching for the word. "Powder, like the parcels what come from the chemist. And a bit sweet, like anise." "Anise," Poirot murmured. His gaze went to the launch's gunwale. A smear of pale dust sat in the angle where wood meets metal, precisely where careful hands do not think to wipe. He touched it with a fingertip, then brought it to his nose. There it was, the faint, clean sweetness of a pharmacy draught. "You see, Captain? Our passenger had a headache. If one wished her to travel quietly, one would make the draught a little more persuasive." He turned to the boy again. "These men, describe them." The boy obliged, the tall one with the scar on the chin, the shorter with the cap pulled low. The tall one had whistled through his teeth. The short one had a cough. They had said little, and what they said was not in a language the boy knew. They paid in cash, and told him to say nothing to Mr. Wilcox. The boy looked guilty as he said it, as if silence were a coin already spent. Poirot's eyes had gone not to the boy's face, but to the shed. The door hung on a new hinge, bright against the dull. He opened it with 2 fingers and stood a moment without stepping inside. The air held a stale breath of rope and engine parts, and something else, something recent and human. He looked down. On the packed earth lay a small, sharp object, half pressed into the floor. A pin, the head enamelled with a violet. He lifted it delicately, and the pressed violet inside Miss Markham's book came to him without effort. The echo of a colour is sometimes more precise than a signature. "Captain," he said, offering the enamel to the lamplight with a small, inward smile, "we begin to see. The crate returns here. It is opened not upon the pier, where eyes are many, but inside this shed where the shadow is loyal. A lady emerges. Perhaps the head is light, the feet uncertain. She leans here." He touched the door frame, where a faint smear of powder made a print that was not a hand yet carried the curve of one, and something small catches, is tugged free, and falls. "Markham's?" Morris said under his breath. "Or another woman's," Poirot said mildly. "Do not rush. The tide, it does not. But we will not waste what the sea gives back. We have the scent of the draught. We have the violet. We have the time of return." Footsteps approached along the pier. A broad man in shirt-sleeves and a cap came into the pen with the injured affront of one who finds strangers regarding his property. Mr. Wilcox had a florid face and careful hands. He bristled at the captain and subsided at the name Poirot, as dogs do at an owner's friend. He answered without much hedging. Yes, he had hired out the boat at the request of a gentleman who sent 2 men to pick it up. No, He had not asked questions. One does not when the coin is good and the job is clean. Did he know the men? He did not. Had he seen what they brought back? He had not, but the shed had been used. He had told the boy to mop it. Poirot took him a little aside. "Monsieur, this is not a matter of smuggling. It is a matter that may become ugly in the papers if it is not kept neat. Help us to keep it neat, huh? Who engaged you?" Wilcox looked at the harbour as if it could answer for him. "Message came by a lad with a bicycle from a public telephone. Said to have the boat ready. Gave the hour, the pay. That's the name you want, the one who sent the lad." "And the lad?" "From Bradford Street," Wilcox said after a moment. "At the back of St. Martin's. He runs errands for half the piers." It turned them toward land for a little. Evening was laying a gold stripe across the water and turning the stone to warm flesh. Bradford Street was a line of small shops and smaller lives, a tobacconist, a pawnbroker, a tea-room with 2 wire chairs on the pavement, and the public telephone box, a glass-framed booth that carried a city's worth of whispers. The errand boy was got with the exchange of a shilling and a kind word from Poirot. He described the man who had given him the message. Not tall, not short, fair moustache, good coat, good shoes. He had written the instructions on a page torn from a pocket diary and had said the word Calshot, as if it were nothing. "Calshot," Captain Morris repeated, not disguising his relief at a place he could mark with a finger. "The spit by the fort." "Calshot was the arrangement," Poirot said with a small shake of the head, "until it was not. Our lady received a note in the morning and changed the rendezvous. The harbour gentleman told us the launch put out east. Calshot lies south. Netley, however, Netley lies east, and it has an old landing where one may step ashore if one is cautious, and does not mind the view of ruins. The note to the morning said Calshot. The message that followed said otherwise." He tapped the telephone box lightly. "It is always the second instructions that interest me, Captain, not the first." They walked back in the long light to where the pier met the road. Poirot's tread had a new decision. "I will make the experiment," he said quietly. "I will tell them, our little circle, that a telegram addressed to Madame Fernley has been received at the harbour office. It is a small lie to reveal the larger truth. I will say it names Netley. The guilty, they are like the fish. When you splash in the water, they rush or they freeze." Morris's eyes glinted with unwilling admiration. "You'll see who flinches." "I will see who corrects me," Poirot said, smiling. "It is the more useful flinch." The saloon took them back as if it had been holding its breath. The suspects had been kept close by the captain's orders. No one had yet been permitted to go ashore, and the evening had drawn a faint weariness across their faces that stripped away a little of artifice. Mrs. Varley had removed her hat. Sir Alister's tie was minimally loosened. Dr. Rathbone's hair had the ruffled look of a man who runs a hand over it when thinking. Miss Markham sat very straight, as if posture could be a net. Poirot stood where the light from the porthole made a gentle ellipse on the carpet. "A message has been received at the harbour office for Madame Fernley," he said pleasantly. "It mentions Netley, and asks whether the arrangement at 6 is still to hold." A nothing phrase, Netley, 6, dropped like a pebble into a still pool. The ripples came at once and differently. Sir Alister's eyes shot to the captain's face, and then away, as if unwillingly seeking authority. Mrs. Varley's hand moved to her throat and touched, not her pendant, but bare skin above it, an instinctive anchoring. Dr. Rathbone's glance flicked to the mantel clock and back. It was almost invisible, almost nothing, but it was to the clock he looked, not to Poirot. Julian Dane, contrary to expectation, did not look at his notebook. He looked at Miss Markham, and Miss Markham did not look anywhere. She kept very still, and it was a stillness that trembled. Poirot's voice, still mild, made a small bridge. "Curious, is it not, that a woman who has no appointments should be asked to keep one? More curious that those who know nothing of Netley should look where time is kept. Doctor, does 6 o'clock concern you? Rathbone coloured. It concerns every man who keeps his day to an hour, Mr. Poirot. If there is a meeting at Netley, it concerns the police. Just so, Poirot agreed. And if there were a meeting at Calshot instead? Would that interest you more or less? There it was, the necessary slip. Rathbone's lips parted. She said Calshot, he snapped, recovering too late. He turned that instant of exposure into disdain with brittle speed. Everyone says Calshot when they mean the spit. Not everyone, Poirot said, and his eyes were kind in their victory. Only those who have heard it said already. He let the doctor's discomfort soak into the carpet and diffuse. Then he turned toward Miss Markham with a gentleness that was almost private. Mademoiselle, when you pressed a violet long ago, did you intend it to betray you? I think not. But violets are traitors. They keep their shape against the flattening. You dropped a pin today in a place where a lady climbed down from a crate and steadied herself against a door. Was it you who steadied her? The word broke and remade itself. Yes, Miss Markham said quietly, and then, in a rush that was swift but not hysterical, she asked me to help. She said it would be the last time. She said if she could leave without being seen, a whole chapter of her life would close. I have not betrayed her, Monsieur Poirot. I have only kept faith. Faith with whom? Sir Alister asked sharply, leaning forward, the knuckles white on his chair arms. With a woman who lied to us all? Markham's chin lifted the smallest degree. With a woman who was trying not to be cornered. Mrs. Varley's voice floated, silk over wire. By whom? For the first time since the beginning of the affair, Miss Markham looked directly at one of them and did not drop her gaze. By the person who erased their name in the doctor's book, she said, very clear, because that person had been to see her too, before her headache, and did not wish it known. Rathbone gave a short, incredulous laugh. Are we to draw charges from smudges and flowers? Poirot's hand lifted and settled in a calming arc. No, doctor. We are to draw sense from people. For instance, Mademoiselle says she helped Madame to the shed and saw her leave. If that is true, he bowed slightly to Miss Markham, then our lady disembarked alive. That is good. It leaves us the more delicate question, who feared what she would say once she stood on land? For it is one thing to move a person unseen, and another to keep them silent when they can choose to speak. He let the room taste the words. I think that is why a list of names was made, not of enemies to be accused, but of 3 who would be told something when she arrived. What something? Dane's voice had thinned. The question was drafted to sound casual, and did not. The truth, Poirot said simply. Not about a crime of the body, perhaps. About one of money, or reputation, or identity. Les masques obligatoires, the masks one must wear. Madame Fernley knew whose mask would be most painful to remove. Miss Markham's hands had unclasped. The fingers splayed on her skirt, as if to brace herself against a shifting deck. She never meant to go to Calshot, she said, and in saying it, cut a cord that had held her. It was Netley. She told me so at 4 o'clock when she sent me to take the air. She said if anyone asked, I was to say she was resting. She had the note. She hid it in the yellow book. When the men came in the shed, they set down the crate, and she stepped out. She was smiling. She said, It's finished, Violet. One last crossing. And then she was gone. Gone where? Captain Morris asked, voice rough with practical need. She said someone would meet her by the wall, beyond the old hospital, Miss Markham said. A man who was not the first arrangement. The first arrangement, she looked unwillingly at Dr. Rathbone, was unsafe. Rathbone's mouth thinned. I have nothing to do with rendezvous by ruined walls, he said coldly. I dispense powders and plasters. That is all. Poirot considered him for a moment, then nodded, as if giving the man the courtesy of time. "It grows late," he said, and the words were both observation and choice. "We will go to Netley, Captain. The tide will have made its little change. The footprints will be less obliging, but the stones, they remember what the mud forgets. And mes amis," his gaze swept them lightly and left no mark yet, "we will be careful as we go, for when one mask is lifted, others feel the air on their faces and are afraid." He turned, and as he did so, the harbour outside gave a little metallic sound, like a spoon set down too carefully on a saucer. It had the air of a signal that did not know to whom it signalled. Poirot smiled at it, as if at an old acquaintance, and followed the captain out, the evening folding around them like a curtain that parts cleanly when it is pulled at the proper cord. The drive to Netley was made in near silence, save for the low hum of the motor and the occasional crunch of gravel when the road curved too tightly for the tyres to hold their whisper. Poirot sat beside Captain Morris in the front, his hands folded precisely on his knees, his gaze fixed on the winding strip of road ahead, as if each bend in it were another twist in the mind of the vanished woman. Behind them, the purser stared out into the thinning light, his eyes moving over the fields and shadowed hedgerows that blurred past. The old hospital ruins came into view slowly, the outline first, like a piece of torn paper against the sky, then more solid. The long, low facade and broken windows, the overgrown courtyards where nettles grew unchallenged. The tide had retreated far enough to expose a broad stretch of damp, glistening mud between the crumbling sea-wall and the water's edge. Poirot stepped out, breathing in the faint metallic tang of the estuary. The wall was pitted and uneven, its stones still cool from the tide. He let his eyes travel the length of it, not hurriedly, noting where the moss clung and where it was rubbed away. Near the midpoint, at the edge of a break in the wall, where a narrow path led inland, there was a faint scuff in the moss, as though a shoe had pressed against it for balance. "Here, Captain," Poirot said softly, touching the mark. "One places the foot thus, when one waits and looks along the shore." Morris crouched, studying the impression. "It could be days old." "Or hours," Poirot replied, straightening. "Look, the edge is not yet dry. The tide was high at 3 o'clock. This is after that." They followed the path inland, moving slowly. The undergrowth was sparse in places, crushed in others. Poirot bent once to pick up a shred of pale fabric caught on a thorn, light wool, the kind a lady's coat might be made of. He folded it carefully into his pocket. Beyond the path lay an open space bordered by a stand of wind-bent trees. Here, the ground was firmer, the grass still flattened in two parallel lines, as though something narrow but heavy had been dragged across it. At the far end stood a weathered bench, the wood gone soft with age, and beside it the faint black circle of a recent fire. "Someone waited here," Morris said, his voice low, "and left quickly." Poirot nodded. "A fire for signal, perhaps. A boat watching offshore would see the smoke against the pale sky. The launch returns, or another comes. Our Lady steps into it, unseen from the pier, the perfect continuation of her disappearance." The purser had moved toward the bench, his eye caught by something half hidden in the grass. He bent, then held up a small glass vial, the cork still pressed in. Inside was the faint trace of a cloudy liquid. Poirot took it delicately, tilting it in the light. The scent, when released, was unmistakable, the same anise-laced powder from the crate. "It is the companion to the draught given on the ship," Poirot said, replacing the cork. "Enough to keep a head pleasantly heavy, enough to dull the will if one hesitated." They turned back toward the wall, following the line of flattened grass to where it ended abruptly at the shore. Here, the mud bore the deep imprints of boots, larger and wider than a woman's step, and in one place the narrow gouge of a boat's keel, where it had grounded for a moment before pushing off. Morris stood gazing out across the water. They could be anywhere by now. Not anywhere, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. They are where their arrangement lies. You see, Captain, such affairs are made in layers. The first layer, the note in the morning, names Calshot. This is the decoy, the arrangement known to more than one person. The second, the telephone message, names Netley. This is the true arrangement, but not the final one. The final is known only to two, the one who departs and the one who receives. Morris turned to him sharply. And you think you know the receiver? Poirot's moustache lifted faintly. I think I know who has feared from the first that Madame Fernley might speak, and I think they arranged to take her to a place where speaking would no longer matter, or be possible. The walk back to the motor car was unhurried, Poirot pausing once more at the break in the wall to examine the scuffed moss. A woman waiting here, wearing a coat of light wool, leaning thus to watch the water, holding perhaps a small parcel. Yes, it is clear. She sees the signal, she descends the path, and she is gone. As they drove back toward Southampton, the sky deepened to a blue that seemed almost black along the horizon. The harbour lights were beginning to prick the water when they reached the quay. Poirot asked for the suspects to be brought once more to the saloon, their patience now worn to the thinness of paper. They entered with varying shades of irritation, suspicion, and unease. Miss Markham avoided Dr. Rathbone's gaze. Dane's eyes were bright, almost feverish, as if hungry for the next turn in the game. Mrs. Varley smiled, but it was the kind of smile that one puts on for a photographer, all surface and no depth. Sir Alistair looked as though he had spent the intervening hours in silent, private argument. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his hands behind his back. "We have been to Netley," he began simply. "We found where Madame Fernley came ashore from the crate. We found where she waited. We found the signal fire and the marks of the boat that took her away. And we found—" He held up the small vial. "This, the same draught she took aboard, given again, perhaps, to ensure she continued her journey without interruption." He let the silence spread, watching for the smallest betrayal. Rathbone's eyes flicked to the vial, and away too quickly. Miss Markham stared at it, with a kind of sadness, as though it confirmed something she had not wanted to believe. Dane's pencil moved across a page, though the line he drew did not follow words. "The journey from Netley," Poirot went on, "was not improvised. It was the third arrangement. Only one person here knew both the first arrangement and the need to change it. Only one had both the opportunity and the reason to keep her from speaking when she landed." He took a step forward, his voice still quiet. "I said once that the list of names was not of enemies, but of those to whom she would tell something upon her arrival. The first was Miss Markham, who had her loyalty. The second was Mr. Dane, who would know how to use the truth if it served him. And the third," Poirot's eyes came to rest on the doctor, "was you, Doctor Rathbone, because you had something to lose if she spoke, and because you were the only one who knew exactly how much of the draft would keep her compliant without harm, at least until the journey was done." Rathbone's lips pressed into a line, the colour draining from his face. "You have no proof." "I have the proof of the erased name in your appointment book," Poirot said. "The name of the man in the reefer jacket who interrupted Mr. Dane on the promenade. The one who passed you a message after you left Madame Fernley's cabin. The proof of your too quick dismissal of the foreign crew, because you had already spoken with them. The proof of a vial left behind at the meeting place, containing the exact mixture you prescribed. And, Doctor," Poirot's voice softened, "the proof of fear in every glance you have given since I mentioned the launch." Rathbone's breath came a little faster. "You're guessing." Poirot inclined his head. "Non, monsieur. I am arranging. The truth, like the furniture in a room, must be set in its proper place before the picture is complete. You arranged for Madame Fernley to leave the ship unseen, to come ashore at Netley, and to be taken somewhere beyond reach. But you did not. Count on one thing. that I would follow not her trail, but yours. The room was very still. Outside, a gull cried once and was gone. Poirot let the quiet stand a moment longer, then turned slightly toward Captain Morris. "We will need the police, mon capitaine, and a launch of our own." Rathbone's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. It was the silence of a man who knows the tide is against him, and that the current, once it takes hold, will not be turned. The police launch cut a narrow seam through the dark water, its lamp throwing a modest tremor of light that slid along the ripples and broke on the pilings like whispers. Captain Morris stood forward with the coxswain. Behind them, 2 constables sat alert and uncomfortable in their oilskins. Poirot, tucked small and composed near the wheel, let the wind file past his ears, while his mind did the tidying that the night demanded. He had asked, almost as an afterthought, to bring along the small vial from Netley. It glinted once when the lamp swung, then went back to being only another piece, where a larger picture required its place. They went first to the spit at Calshot, not because Poirot believed the rendezvous had ever been meant there, but because men who change plans leave, unavoidably, a frayed edge at the abandoned cloth. The fort loomed mild and disinterested. The shore gave them nothing but shingle and the scent of old salt. The coxswain turned east at Poirot's soft word, and the launch nosed along the coast toward the lower, darker water where Netley's ruin leaned its shoulder to the night. Poirot signalled to throttle down. "Here," he said. "We do not go again to the wall. We go where one would go next, if one were a man who likes his arrangements to be tidy. A little upstream, where the inlets become like drawers. One chooses the one that closes best." They slipped into a narrow gut of water where reeds whispered like conspirators. The lamp picked out the blunt snout of a skiff moored under low branches, and behind it the suggestion of a boathouse whose timber had learned to keep its own counsel. The door, when pushed, swung back with the politeness of something recently used. Inside, the dark was dry and smelled faintly of rope, tar, and the clean, cooling odor of soap. Poirot did not rush to the center of the floor where the eye wishes to go. He turned instead to the edges, where life, careless of detectives, leaves behind its pebbles. A coil of line lay in a circle, so even it had to have been set down by a hand that minded circles. On a shelf, a monkey spanner rested handle out, the metal clean as if wiped after use, the head marked by a small stamp, K and R inside a neat hexagon. Poirot lifted it, weighed it gently, replaced it in the exact angle, and only then crossed to where the constable had made a soft sound in his throat. The man in the reefer jacket lay half behind a propped dinghy, as if he had been set there to wait, and had neglected to sit up again. The cap had rolled to rest against a spar. The chin that had been described with a scar turned to the side, the scar a pale hyphen. There was no blood, but at the temple the hair lay oddly. Poirot's fingers, light as a moth's wing, found the rising beneath, the bruise budding under skin. "Delivered," he said quietly, with neatness. "A blow that does not spill, a blow from a tool one has to hand." His eyes went to the spanner, not because he doubted, but because proof likes to be looked at. The constables bent to their work. Poirot moved away, a square of oilcloth, recently folded and then unfolded, a crate plank, sawn down, its stenciled water broken so that only what remained. The inner edge bearing, almost invisibly, the ghost of another stencil applied first and sanded. Kent, the T leaving a small crossbar in the grain like a dimple. He touched it once. "Ah," he breathed, not for the room, but for the idea that arrived on it. He cast the lamp's circle along the bench and found, near the edge, a small object that had taken the light personally, a brass washer, fine-threaded, with the same K and R stamped near the bore. He cupped it in his palm, as if it were animate. "Robbery?" one constable offered without conviction. "Non," said Poirot, his voice gentle. because loud voices bounce in places like these and bring one nothing. This is a man who was paid to be precise, and who was killed by someone more precise still. And the one who killed him set down the spanner as he always does, and left the coil as he always coils, and wiped his hands as he always wipes them, until there is almost nothing to see. It is nearly clean. Nearly is the murderer's favourite word. Captain Morris, grim at the sight of the body, looked to Poirot. Rathbone? Poirot shook his head. The doctor erases with a pencil. He does not sand planks and stamp washers. This is the exactness of the machine, of the man who lives in right angles and tolerances, a man whose knuckles have the little old white scars where metal meets skin. Sir Alister Kent keeps his coil round and his spanner ready, mon capitaine. You think he came here himself? Morris's incredulity was less moral than practical. I think, Poirot said, that he came to correct an untidiness, a man who could name him, and that he did not consider that his brand is also a signature. They took what the scene would give, and left the rest to the men whose work it is to measure and lift and bear. On the launch, the night had become itself, without ceremony. Poirot stood near the prow as they turned back, and if his posture was still, his mind ran a gentle linen cloth over all he had now, the chemist's anise, the erased name, the violet pin, the decoy rendezvous, the K and R hexagon, the coil like a drawing instrument's circle. It was almost done, only the placement remained. Back aboard the Galatea, the saloon's lamps made domestic islands against the dark, beyond the portholes. The faces that turned to them had the look people get when time grows heavier. Attenuated patience, private calculations, little rehearsals of indignation or surprise. Poirot did not waste their rehearsals. "A man is dead," he said without embroidery. "The one in the reefer jacket, who asked Monsieur Dane for the time. He lies in a boathouse east of Netley with a bruise upon his head. He will not now tell us who engaged him to pass messages, or whom he met there to hand over his last coin. He will not name the person who struck him, not because dead men cannot speak, but because the man who struck him has already introduced himself to us very clearly in another language." He let the pause rest. It is not only questions that draw out truth, so does silence placed in the right time. "The language," Poirot continued softly, "of habit. In the boathouse are a spanner and a washer stamped K and R. There is a crate plank sanded smooth, where another stencil read, Kent. There is a coil of line set down with a draftsman's eye. There is no theatre there, Madame Varley. There is no devotion there, Reverend Greaves. There is no bromide there, Doctor. There is machinery, order, and the tidy correction of an error." Sir Alister's face did not change at first. Then the jaw that liked to grind a grain of sand performed its small, betraying movement. "My factories," he said, with the incredulousness of class pressed by reality. "Every man in Southampton has a spanner stamped with somebody's initials. Any fool could—" "Not any," Poirot said, almost pitying. "This fool picked yours 3 times over without knowing it. The spanner, the washer, the plank once used to crate water pumps from Kent and Rupert Works. And there is the 4th time, the coil. You coil by taking the rope through the finger and thumb, always the same length, always the little tuck as you finish. It is a habit that pleases the eye. I saw it on your chain, Sir Alister, where you lay it just so over your waistcoat. It is nothing. It is everything." Dane had not moved. The pencil that took down the lives of others now did not stir for his own. If Sir Alister killed the courier, what of the woman? He wouldn't have... not in a boathouse. "No," Poirot agreed, eyes going to Dane because the man asked as a listener, and because listeners are a form of mercy. Not there, and not at all, if he could help it. He wished her unable to speak until she was where the speaking would be useless. He wished her paper, not voice. He wished the documents, and not the woman. And when he could not be certain of the courier's silence, he applied his tool to the temple and arranged neatness. Dr. Rathbone gave a hard, dry sound that he did not dignify by calling a laugh. You are very sure of your symmetries, Monsieur Poirot. You lay out your case like a collation tray. But there is still your missing lady. We may chase shadows and stamps all night. The simple fact remains that a woman with a headache is not a ledger. She is not, Poirot said, turning to him, and his voice changed the width of a hair, enough for the doctor to hear it. She is a woman who knew that in a fortnight Sir Alister's company would receive a tender, under price and in violation of a shipping agreement, and that her position in his office had made her an unwilling witness, and then an unwilling accomplice. She is a woman who decided, too late for Alister and too soon for herself, to become a whistle, un sifflet, and found that gentlemen do not forgive women who whistle. She is also a woman who had once been a different woman. He glanced, very briefly, at Mrs. Varley. She wore masks well enough to pass one season as another. She learned in Nice and Rome that names are only frames. But the picture did not change, neither Sir Alister's fear nor her resolve. Varley held his gaze with the brave indifference of a woman who has been appraised by men and is past the age of blushing for it. You'll say next, I taught her to wear them. No, Poirot said gently. You reminded her she had one. It is not the same. Captain Morris, businesslike to the bone even in drama, cut through. Where is she now? In the last place where Sir Alister could keep her altered without the risk of altering her forever, Poirot answered. He looked to Rathbone and saved the man the indignity of forcing him to speak first. Doctor, in your erasure is a name, not the courier's. The courier came to you and you struck him out. Before that, earlier today, you wrote down a place you intended to go after your duty ended. A warehouse, perhaps, a shed, a room with clean walls where a head can be laid down and a wrist watched. You erased it because you thought, quite sensibly, that the fewer lines between you and the woman the better. But lines do not disappear when rubbed. They indent. I saw them. A word with a double loop and a tail, and then a number. Woolston 9. The Woolston stores are numbered. 9 belongs to Kent and Rupert for the storage of pump housings. It is clean. It is quiet. And it is a place where a man can set a chair, a stool, a jug of water, and say to a woman with a headache, you will sleep. You will be comfortable. You will not concern yourself with speaking. Rathbone's face was a pallor with a will in it. I did not harm her, he said to the room, voice very calm now that confession had been pressed into a shape he could own. I was told she had nerves, that if I gave her too much, I would answer for it. I gave her enough for quiet. By a window? Poirot asked, almost tender, because pity is also an instrument. With a blind set to the same height on both sides? Rathbone looked at him, startled, then unwillingly respectful. Yes, she dislikes asymmetry. Merci, Poirot said, and it was not for the detail, but for the admission beneath it, that the woman was alive when last he saw her. He turned to the captain. If you please, we go to Woolston, store 9. We go before Sir Alister's neatness extends to yet another correction, and we bring with us a woman who has helped once, and will help again. Miss Markham had stood wordless until then, correction sitting in every joint. I will go, she said simply. Sir Alister rose very slowly, as if his height could be used to press the air flatter. The constable near the door moved with the swiftness of a cat who has been asleep with one eye open. The nightly indignation came at last, as Poirot knew it would. You build a case on coils and washers, Kent said in a low, steady tone, on a factory's mark and a servant girl's flower. You'll find nothing in my warehouse but machines. I hope, Poirot said, to find a woman and a paper, one you wish to have without the inconvenience of the hand that carried it. And I think, Sir Alister, that when we open the drawer in which your neatness placed that paper, We will find it under the thing you use the least." He inclined his head a fraction. "Because exact men have habits that do not change even in rooms where they mean to be someone else." They went out into the night that had waited obligingly through their indoor words. The police launch would be quicker than a motor car. The tide would favour them a little. The storehouses at Woolston would hold their smell of iron and oil, even if every window stood open. Poirot stepped into the cold air with the air of a man who has set all the chairs in a room where they belong, and now means to invite the company back to hear why they have been placed so. The harbour answered with that small metallic sound again, as if some cautious hand had put down a spoon on a saucer. It pleased him. It meant the evening had begun to agree with him. The police launch slid across the black water, its prow cutting a steady seam toward the darker bulk of Woolston's shoreline. The warehouses loomed like patient giants, their shapes interrupted by the pale rectangles of numbered doors. A gull's cry split the air once, then was swallowed by the hum of the motor. Poirot stood forward this time, his hands clasped at the small of his back, eyes on the figure 9, painted high on a wall that rose out of the shadows as they approached. The wind lifted the edges of his coat, but his posture was still and precise, as if the whole night had been arranged to his specification. A constable leapt ashore to secure the mooring, while Captain Morris and Poirot stepped onto the wooden pier. The boards creaked beneath their weight, and the scent of iron and oil was stronger here, threaded through with the faint tang of damp hemp rope. The door to Store 9 stood as Poirot had imagined, locked, but without the dust that a door gains when it is long untouched. The constable turned the key from the ring they'd obtained from the harbour office. The hinges gave a muted groan, and the interior opened before them in a rush of cold, stale air. Light from 2 handheld lamps revealed the long interior, a broad space lined with tall shelving stacked with crates, pump housings, and bundles of coiled piping. The order was immaculate, rows aligned, floor swept, the smell of oil unbroken by decay. And yet, to Poirot's eye, there was a subtle wrongness, the kind of dissonance that occurs when a note is slightly off-key. He paused just inside, letting the others' footsteps echo away, and listened to the room's quiet. It was Miss Markham who broke it, her voice low but certain. "She is here." Poirot inclined his head without turning. "Because you feel it, mademoiselle? Or because you see?" "Because I know her habits," she said simply. She would choose the spot where she could see the door. They moved inward, the constables fanning to either side, their lamps sweeping narrow arcs of light along the shelving. Near the far wall, beyond a stack of wooden crates marked with the K&R hexagon, was a small partition section, an office or storage alcove. Its door stood ajar, and a faint draught carried with it the scent of the same light wool Poirot had folded into his pocket at Netley. Inside, the space had been transformed into something halfway between a waiting room and a holding cell. A single chair sat near the wall beneath a high, wired window. A small table bore a jug of water and a glass. A blanket lay folded on the chair's back, and beside it, on the floor, a travel case with initials embossed in faded gilt. E.F. Poirot's gaze lingered on the case only a moment before moving to the figure seated in the chair. She was not bound. She was upright, her hands folded in her lap, her head turning toward the light as they entered. The eyes that met Poirot's were steady, though faintly shadowed by weariness. She was, as the steward had described her, well dressed in a dove-grey coat, her hat set at an angle, her posture composed in a way that spoke of years spent managing appearances. "Madame Fernley," Poirot said, bowing slightly, "we have been concerned for you." Her lips curved into a smile that was neither warm nor cold. "Then you have been wasting your concern, Monsieur Poirot. I am perfectly well." Miss Markham stepped forward, her composure faltering for the first time that evening. "Eloise, you shouldn't—" She stopped, unsure whether to embrace her or not. Fernley's gaze softened a fraction. "Violet, you did as I asked?" "She did," Poirot said, before Miss Markham could speak. "But others did not. Others wished you to travel farther than you perhaps intended." Fernley's eyes flickered, just briefly, toward the doorway. "Farther? I was to meet someone here. We were to discuss certain documents." "Just so," Poirot replied. "And those documents, do you still have them?" For the first time, her poise shifted. "They are safe." "Safe," Poirot repeated, stepping into the room fully, "is a word that depends entirely on one's point of view. To you, safe means in the hands of the person you trust. To Sir Alistair Kent, it means in his possession, without you to accompany them. That difference, madame, is why you were brought here in a crate." She did not feign surprise. "You know, then?" "I know that you sought to prevent a fraud, and that you feared you would be silenced before you could speak. I know you made a list of 3 who might help or might harm, depending on what you told them. And I know that one of those 3 arranged for the courier of your message to be removed permanently tonight." The faintest breath escaped her. "Then I am in more danger than I thought." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But tonight the danger is to the one who placed you here. The police will attend to Sir Alistair. Your part, madame, is to decide whether you will speak as you intended, or whether the fear that brought you into this arrangement will keep you silent." She studied him for a long moment. "You speak as though my silence would condemn more than one man." "It may," Poirot agreed, "but silence, madame, is also a kind of mask, and I think you have worn yours long enough." She rose then, moving with deliberate steadiness toward the travel case. From its side pocket, she withdrew a slim leather folder, worn at the edges. She held it out to Poirot. "These are the copies. The originals are elsewhere. I thought, if they took these, perhaps they would think they had everything." Poirot accepted the folder, glancing at the papers inside. Contracts, shipping manifests, correspondence. Enough to tell the story, enough to ruin the scheme. "And the originals?" "In a bank in London, under another name," she said. "I told only one person which bank, and I see now that was my mistake." Poirot closed the folder gently. "Then we go to London, when the time comes. But first, we return to Southampton, and you will be under police protection." Fernley's eyes moved once more to Miss Markham. "You kept your word. I am grateful." Miss Markham's reply was quiet. "I thought you might never know." Poirot gestured toward the doorway. "Captain Morris will see you to the launch. I will follow presently." When they had gone, Poirot remained in the small room, his gaze moving once more over its neat arrangement, the folded blanket, the full jug of water, the high window with its blinds drawn to the same height on each side. He touched the back of the chair lightly, then turned to rejoin the others. The return across the water was made under a sky in which the stars had begun to gather. Fernley sat between the constables, her face turned toward the dark horizon, her expression unreadable. Poirot, seated opposite, studied her for a moment before speaking. "There is one thing I must—" "No, madame. Why did you trust Miss Markham to aid you, but not to tell her the whole of your plan?" Fernley's eyes shifted to him. "Because the fewer who knew the final arrangement, the better, and because Violet has too honest a face to lie well." Poirot's moustache twitched. An admirable quality, though inconvenient for conspiracy. They docked at the quay where the Galatea still lay at her berth. News had travelled ahead of them. Rathbone had been taken into custody, and Sir Alistair, under police watch, was to be removed before dawn. Poirot escorted Fernley to the captain's cabin, where she would remain until the morning train to London. Outside, the harbour was quiet again, the water lapping softly at the pilings. Poirot paused at the rail, the leather folder in his hand, and looked back toward the faint outline of Woolston across the dark water. The evening had left its pieces in neat order, the woman found, the plot exposed, the guilty in custody. And yet, as always, there remained the unspoken reflections on fear, on the masks people wear, and on how close order lies to deception when both are applied with precision. He turned at last, stepping into the warmth of the ship, his mind already arranging how the final gathering of suspects would unfold. For the picture was not yet complete, and until every shadow had been accounted for, Hercule Poirot would not be satisfied. The saloon was lit brightly enough that no shadow could claim ownership of a corner. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle before the long table where Captain Morris stood with folded arms, the police inspector beside him. Sir Alister Kent sat stiffly, flanked by two constables. Dr. Rathbone leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a mask of cool detachment over a face that had grown pale. Mrs. Varley, Julian Dane, Miss Markham, and Madame Fernley completed the ring, though only one of them, the last, sat as if the evening were not intended to be her trial. Poirot took his place in the centre of the space, the leather folder of documents resting on the table before him. He surveyed the group with the serenity of a man about to put the final piece into a puzzle he had already completed in his mind. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "you have each wondered, perhaps, what exactly befell Madame Fernley between the moment she was last seen reading in her cabin and the moment she was found tonight in store number 9 at Woolston. You have guessed, some correctly, some not. But the truth is as precise as the line between the teeth of a gear. Allow me to set it in order." He paced slowly, fingertips together. Madame Fernley boarded the Galatea, not merely as a passenger, but as a witness to a fraud. She had in her possession documents, these documents, proving that Sir Alister Kent's company intended to violate an international shipping agreement by underpricing a tender, securing a contract through deceit. This information she intended to pass to certain parties in London, and to guard herself against interference, she created a list of 3 names, those she believed might be told the truth upon arrival. That list included Miss Markham, Mr. Dane, and Dr. Rathbone. He turned to Rathbone. The doctor's inclusion was not out of trust, but necessity. She feared her health might fail on the journey. Indeed, she had suffered from headaches. But the doctor, knowing her list included himself, feared she would speak to the others before they reached shore, and so he supplied a draft that would keep her quiet, and he conspired to remove her from the ship before she could disembark publicly. Rathbone's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot moved on, his voice measured. The first arrangement, the decoy, was Calshot, mentioned in the morning note from a launch bringing supplies, but the true rendezvous, arranged later by telephone, was at Netley. There, Madame Fernley would be met by a courier in a reefer jacket, this man, who would take her to a safe place to await her onward journey. That courier was paid to keep silent, but his discretion was doubted by another. Poirot's gaze went to Sir Alister. "For you, monsieur, the documents were worth more than the woman's silence. You knew where she was going, for you had intercepted the courier's instructions. You went to the boathouse east of Netley not to meet her, but to remove the man who could connect you to her disappearance. You struck him with a spanner marked, as was the washer left behind, with the K and R stamp of your own works. And because you are a man of exact habits, you left the coil of rope as you always do, a perfect circle, a coil that spoke your name more clearly than any witness could." Kent's mouth twitched, the smallest sign of strain. "The plan, of course, was simple after that," Poirot continued. "Rathbone would keep Madame Fernley in a compliant state, you would take the documents once she was delivered, and she would be left somewhere she could not trouble you until the tender was complete. But you did not count on Miss Markham's loyalty so strong that she helped Madame leave her cabin unseen and gave me the key to follow her trail. Nor did you count on the courier's death drawing police attention to your movements that night, and enfin, you did not count on me." He opened the leather folder and withdrew the top sheet, laying it flat for all to see. "These are the copies of the documents she carried. The originals are in a London bank. Even if you had succeeded, Sir Alistair, you would have had only this, proof enough to implicate yourself, and none to protect you." Fernley's voice, calm and clear, broke the silence. "You thought you could tidy me away like a misfiled report, but I've learned the difference between silence and safety." Poirot inclined his head to her. "Madame, you have learned well. And now, the matter passes to the authorities." The inspector stepped forward, signalling the constables. Sir Alistair rose, his height lending him a last moment of defiance, but the click of the handcuffs was the only reply. Rathbone, too, was taken in custody, his role in administering the drug and aiding in the abduction leaving no ambiguity in the law's eyes. When they were gone, the saloon seemed larger, the air looser. Mrs. Varley gave a soft laugh without humour. "It seems we all wore masks, Monsieur Poirot. Only some of us forgot to remove them." Poirot's moustache lifted faintly. "And some, madame, discovered they were better without them." Miss Markham turned to Fernley, and for the first time that night, the two women embraced briefly. Dane closed his notebook with a decisive snap, the story already written in his head. Poirot gathered the documents, aligning their edges with his usual care. "It is the same in all such affairs, mes amis. Men commit crimes thinking of profit or protection, but they forget that order, true order, is not about hiding the untidy thing. It is about placing every piece where it belongs, and the truth, like a stubborn ornament, will always roll back to its proper place, no matter how far one pushes it." Captain Morris exhaled, his shoulders easing. "I'll see Madame Fernley off to London in the morning. You've done us a service, Poirot." Poirot's eyes warmed. "It is nothing, mon capitaine, only the application of the little grey cells, and a respect for symmetry." He turned toward the door, pausing only to adjust the angle of a chair that stood a fraction out of line with the others. Then, with a small nod to himself, Hercule Poirot stepped out into the night, leaving the ship and its troubles in perfect order once more.